I thought about something that I've been wanting to talk about for a little while now. Something that I think you might enjoy, something that most people don't talk about. I know I've talked about on this channel how I'm a communist, and that my prediction is that you're going to see an increase in revolutionary politics in the United States because of the cost of living crisis. And, as much as I am hedging my bets on that, that's not guaranteed. Here's the thing. Here's a problem that if you're a self-identified communist, of what you have to face when it comes to engaging in class politics in the United States. A, the Social Democrats have their own workers' movement, and they're meaningfully able to get reforms for the working class, and there's not really a need for revolutionary politics, is because you can reform your way into getting what you want. B, there's some kind of other political manifestation of workers' resentment. Maybe a syndicalist party, a fascist party, as much as most people would like to not admit it. That's happened countless times, especially in Western European countries, when workers' parties have their heads so far up their own asses that they're incapable of appealing to the actual internal proletariat of their countries without getting either too sucked into nationalist politics or, just completely antagonizing the internal proletariat entirely. It just seems like there's two extremes that the Western left has always failed to tap into or even talk to the working class of this country. But here's an uncommon idea that you might not have heard before. It's no hidden secret that the United States is an empire in decline. It's desperate. And so most people think that fascism is going to be this thing that's going to emerge, and the United States is going to have a fascist chimp out with Donald Trump at the helm, and we're going to have Adolf Hitler 2.0. I've said before, I don't really see Trump as a Hitler. I see him more as a Nero figure. And I'd say, in a lot of ways, with him being a Nero figure, that's so much worse for us, me as an American, and the outcome for the American people. I made in the last video talking about tariffs that Trump is implementing, and it's effectively a self-sanction in the United States because we produce nothing. We're in a very precarious position that very quickly the United States could internally turn into a third world country very quickly because, as much as we'd love to stimulate domestic production, factories just don't come out of somebody's back pocket. It takes years, maybe even decades to produce if you don't have the proper technology. And since we've sanctioned ourselves and we're not engaging in proper trade to get the necessary utilities to invest in our own country, we're in a tough position that we can't even do it our own way. So here is the uncomfortable truth in this video. What I want to say, not even the uncomfortable truth, the uncomfortable reality that may be plaguing the United States by the end of the 21st century. How the United States might go, the route it might take at the end of the century, how it might be. Have you ever thought to yourself, what is the United States going to look like in the year 2099? And that's not something most of you would probably think about it. What are we as a country going to look like by the turn of the century? Most people don't think of that sort of stuff. If you ask somebody in the 1920s what they thought their country was going to be by the end of the century, 1999, if you ask somebody that was living in the 1920s what they thought the world would look like by the 1990s, I almost certainly can guarantee you that it's radically different than what they might have actually thought it was going to be. A lot of countries, that once existed, rose and fall in that period of time. And so where does the United States fit in this one? What is it going to look like in the year 2099? That's a scary thought because the world radically changed from the way things were in the 1920s to the 1990s, and it's going to be no different than the 2020s and the 2090s. So let's talk about that. Here's an uncomfortable outcome that the United States might endure as a result of the way it's acting geopolitically, because it's so used to power politics, it's so used to bossing people around, acting like a dictator, telling people from the top to bottom what to do and how to live, that it thinks it has forgotten what gave it that leverage in the first place. And out of this arrogance, it's just going to alienate itself from the global stage. I said in another video, and I can't remember the title of it, but I talked about why the communists will never lose power in China. And I said very easily, just as I consider Trump to be Nero, I also consider us to be in the late stages of the Roman Empire. We just haven't fully acknowledged it or even realized it. We have tremendous amount of wealth inequality. We have people who cannot even afford homes to settle down and have families, something that nobody wants to talk about. In fact, they would rather just browbeat the younger generation about eating too much avocado toast, that's more of a millennial thing, or pay for too many streaming services, which they do for Gen Z. So here's the way the United States could go if there is no revolutionary politics, there is no social democratic reforms, that there is nothing to address the existing problems. And this is a very dark reality. It's worse than if the United States had a Hitler-style fascism, in my honest opinion, is because it suffers a much worse fate than just being militarily defeated by world powers and then getting a Marshall Plan to redevelop its country by the rest of the world. What could happen that's so much worse than any other possibility is that the United States just becomes irrelevant and a forgotten, dying empire, and at best a regional power that is backwards and falling behind the rest of the world. Because if you think about the geopolitical dynamics and the interest between other countries, China doesn't give a shit about the United States. It doesn't care about dominating the United States. Why would they care about dominating a country that they don't even like in the first place if they're already destroying themselves internally for them on their behalf? I wouldn't give a shit. If your enemy was actively having a schizo fit, saying that you're behind every single suffering that it has, when you know it's just being retarded, would you care about intervening, saying, well, maybe it's not because, maybe you're just being retarded and you're just doing all these things to yourself? No, you wouldn't do that. You'd be like, yeah, this person's a retard, and you just walk away. And that's what effectively the rest of the world is going to do with the United States, is because while it's busy having its fascist chimp out, or so it thinks it's having it, and it's restoring its global order, which that's, every empire's tried to do that at the end of its lifetime, right? It just walks away from the table and just leaves. That's just what's going to happen. And so what are the consequences of that? The United States has no domestic production, it has largely a service informational economy, and doesn't produce anything. And if the rest of the world just decides to stop supplying goods to the United States, and that includes China, by the way, that puts us in a very tough position where we essentially become a third world country really quickly. That's the uncomfortable thing. And the worst part about it is that if you were to try to tell the average American, who might even be just as arrogant as the ruling class that is dictating these policies and propaganda points, they might not even listen. Even if they are living in a mud hut, they will be so convinced that the rest of the world is so many light years behind them that they believe the third world stereotypes about every other country just being vastly behind them and living in mud huts, that they will live in mud huts in their own futures because they've completely destroyed their own internal economy, what's left of it, while smugly believing that they're ahead and more civilized than the rest of the world. And so here's the uncomfortable truth, but this is what it means to have Middle Kingdom syndrome. What I said earlier in the other video is that if a country becomes so arrogant, it might even think it's the center of civilization itself, completely ignorant to how the rest of the world is moving on without it. That's what happened to the Chinese 200 years ago. But if you try to ask an American of going beyond the particular and understanding the universal principle, is because when I say Middle Kingdom syndrome, any country can have Middle Kingdom syndrome. Arrogance can defeat any country, not just the Chinese. They'll apply it in the particular case of the Chinese, but they'll never look in their own selves to evaluate, have I become so arrogant that I've lost touch with reality? And am I not willing to at least see it or even recognize that maybe the world is not as backwards and retarded and savage as I might think? It'll never do that, is because it's so used to the particularity of Middle Kingdom syndrome only applying to one side of the world for 200 years. It's no different with the Palestinian genocide. People can talk about the oppression of the Jews when it comes to the particular case in history, but they're not capable of understanding what it's like for one group to commit genocide against another group. That is a universal concept. There is one particular victim that is always a victim, and even if they are doing the exact same atrocities that were done against them, it's inconceivable to those who are only capable of thinking of particulars to understand that the universal principle may apply, that somebody can be in the shoes of the other person for once in their timeline. And it always smacks people in the face. And so that's the uncomfortable reality. And I say that as a communist. I say that as somebody who is a far leftist. I'm about as radical left as you get. I believe in a planned economy. And so the thing is I've recognized the fact is that the United States has some really fucking stupid people. They are so arrogant and smug. And if I were to try and tell them this sorts of stuff, they will give me every cope excuse under the book to try and lie and gaslight me why I am wrong. Even though I can bring out hard numbers about the declining standard of living. I could talk about birth rates declining because of the cost of living. But do you know what these pundits and media outlets and propaganda apparatus will tell me? They will tell me it's because the American people have it too nice. That's the reason why they're not having kids. Right-wingers will blame the reason why wages are slipping is not because people don't join unions and rally for their cause and have better standards. No, it's because women entered the workforce. They will never address the actual real issues that are plaguing American society. They will invent some new fictitious concept to be a half-assed bigot over the stupidest fucking thing rather than acknowledge what things actually are. Because they would rather engage in post hoc rationalizations of something they don't like as the fictitious reason on why things are not going the way they want it to, why things are bad, rather than engaging with reality. I know how people think, and maybe I should just kind of accept this fact and just kind of pack my shit and leave the country, because maybe that's what the new American dream is. The new American dream isn't even to prosper in this country anymore. It's just to leave. And the fortunate few who have enough money to pack their shit and leave, go for it. I mean, you already know that if you can carry American bucks to another country, you can live like a king. That's not a hidden secret. So if you've got a couple of bucks and you can basically platform yourself in a country, why wouldn't you just leave? Because the people don't listen. The people are so content in believing that the United States is going to eternally be the center of the world that they will never listen to any suggestion or room for improvement. They will contently sink this ship until it's so far deep under the water before they recognize, oh, there might be a couple of holes in the ship, and that's the reason why it's sinking. They will never actually introspect because they think themselves as the center of civilization itself. Have you ever spoken to somebody so arrogant that it just feels like you can't talk to them? Is because of their arrogance. They're incapable of understanding another perspective. They're incapable of understanding another side. And so every time you try to talk to them, you are browbeaten no matter what you say. And that is basically my position. And so that's an uncomfortable reality that, those of you who are kind of banking on class struggle, might have to face, is that the Middle Kingdom syndrome might be too strong. People just might have their heads so far up their asses that they're never going to listen. Now, I have my skepticisms. I do think that there's a growing class divide between generations. But I'm also very well aware of how thoroughly propagandized people are. And sometimes the propaganda and sniffing your own farts is going to lead to your own demise. And, there's nothing you can do to stop that except let the retards retard. Again, like I said, if your enemy was quite literally, beating themselves up, banging their head on the wall, and then blaming you for that stuff, would you want to intervene? You might say, hey, maybe you're being retarded. I mean, you might try that, but you're not going to go out of your way to save their life. They're the ones that are destroying themselves. Be like, are you really so stupid that you're going to do this? So that's the way I am almost kind of seeing that the existing ruling class and the propaganda apparatus that kisses its ass, they're so far beyond reason that they're not going to listen. And so we go the route where the United States, it can't have a fascist chimp out. They can try. It's not going to be able to succeed. And so it just becomes an irrelevant, dying world power, and people just quietly check out of American society and leave the country. That's a very good possibility of what's going to happen, and there's really nothing else to it. If there's not any major political manifestation of will to actually bring change in this country, that could just be it. You have an arrogant ruling class. Yeah, that's all you can do. So I think I've made my point about the arrogance of this. Sometimes I might just say that the American dream is just to leave. That's the topic of the video. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Leave a comment, share your 2 cents, and say, what do you think is going to be the outcome of the United States? I've given my 2 cents. Feel free to drop your own 2 cents on what you think is going to happen. It's because what's going on now is not going to go on forever. And so, let your voice be heard. There are probably a lot of people who share your similar experience. So, don't be afraid to leave a comment in my comment section. All right, y'all have a good day.